Hello. I've not even got a high profile in Baldrine. It's not referring to myself, but the foremost British author who made the Isle of Man his home. During the time he took a disreputable cad and braggart and reinvented him, and in the process made a career for himself. George Macdonald Fraser, who died in 2008, came to live here at the end of the 1960s because, and he admitted so, the tax was much lower than the UK. He occupied a bungalow in the village of Baldrine for the rest of his life, during which time he invented the Harry Flashman series, with the central character successfully cheating and fornicating his way around society. The books became bestsellers. Based, he claimed, on the Flashman papers, which he said had been discovered in a tea chest at an auction. Some experts assumed they were real and lauded them as one of the great historic finds. He also wrote screenplays, the Musketeer series, the Bond film Octopussy, factual histories, and an autobiography called The Lights Are On at Signpost, a tip of his cap to the island. In this, and indisposed amongst his memories, are, quote, criticisms of political correctness and New Labour. George was interviewed at length by a Manx wordsmith, Terry Cringle. Well, here is that interview, the first of two parts, with George in his soft borders burr, talking about his life and his writing.
This is Terry Cringle. I'm going to be talking to somebody who now qualifies, I think, as an adopted Manxman. He's a distinguished and highly regarded author who has lived and has been doing his work in the Isle of Man in a relatively modest bungalow in Baldrine, to be exact, ever since he took up residence here in 1969, at the very start of his literary success. Now, he's regarded as one of the finest practitioners writing in English today, one of the funniest writers in English today, also a painstaking historian, and a man of decided views about life as we live it today and compared with the way we used to live it. And by now you might have guessed that my guest is George Macdonald Fraser, the writer of the Flashman books and many another work, including a personal memory of war service, which has come to be regarded as a classic. Now, George, if you don't mind, we'll come to the books later. Mm-hmm. You were born in Carlisle, 1925, the son of a doctor, good middle-class education and upbringing, and you are, as much of your work shows, a real, true son of the borders. You're a border man.
Yeah.
But your first Flashman book, you brought the fictional obscurity of the beastly bully of Tom Brown's school days to an end. That was published in 1969, and then you immediately moved to the Isle of Man. So I'm going to ask you why.
Because I didn't, if Flashman was a success, didn't know it was going to be, but if it was, I would rather pay Manx tax than British tax. I mean, there were horrifying stories about other authors and what had happened to them, and if it's a one-off, particularly, you're left with very little. So that's why, mind you, we had connections, oddly enough, with the island, not the kind you'd normally think about. My father-in-law, George Hetherington, was a TT addict and used to come over regularly. And my own uncle, George Fraser, worked he would come over and work as a mechanic, worked in the pits. And so we had that sort of link, and we've been here now more than 30 years, and I always have to say the same thing about the tax question. If they abolished tax altogether across, I wouldn't go back.
But you could have gone anywhere. You could have gone to the West Indies, America, anywhere in the whole wide world. You could have gone to Jersey.
I'm British. I like to stay in Britain. Jersey, I know nothing about. But the island, I was born just across the water in Carlisle, lived in Glasgow. And this is the North Country, and that's the North Country is what my wife is also from Carlisle, and it's what we love. I mean, you could be in Cumberland here.
I was going to say, there's a lot
You
of
know.
similarity. Yeah, there's only a little bit of sea separating us.
Well, you can see it fits into the Solway Firth.
It does indeed, yeah. So life in the Isle of Man, generally speaking, has treated you well, setting aside the question of money.
Wonderfully, wonderfully. We have loved it. I mean, we've count ourselves very privileged to live here, and everyone has been so nice to us. And I like the Manx.
And yet, I must admit, you're a well-known author. You're read across the world. There's a Flashman society, there's a Flashman website. You have all the accoutrements of literary fame. And yet you're not exactly a high-profile citizen of the Isle of Man. I mean, a lot of people know of you, but don't even know you live here.
That's quite true. I mean, we're not even high profile in Baldrine. No, we've never been what you would call terribly sociable. And we weren't before we came here. We weren't in Glasgow. We weren't in Carlisle where we started off. We've been, I don't know, sort of always reclusive. Our daughter, Caro, who also writes novels now in London, she worked for Kelly Luft, went to the Buchan. She knows the island far better than we do, and far more people know her and vice versa, you know. In fact, I think our sons, who used to work on the island in their school holidays, probably know better than we do. They worked in half the shops on the island and on the deck chairs and so on.
They worked on the deck chairs?
Nicky worked on the deck chairs, the younger one. The Caro worked in the Galleon Cafe, among other things.
Yes, I remember it. Well, let's talk about your family for a moment. Kath, your wife, she was a journalist, as you say.
That's right.
And virtually every book you've written has been dedicated to her.
All the Flashmans have been, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, she everything I write, she sees before it goes near an agent or a publisher. If she thinks it's okay, I'm not worried after that, you know.
Well, why is that? I mean,
she's just a very good, well, touch wood. I think she's a very good judge. I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever written anything that she shook her head over. And if she likes it, I figure that's okay. That she likes it, I like it. Who the hell cares who else likes it? You know.
Now, were you surprised when Caro started writing novels?
No, not really. I knew she probably would. We had nothing to do with that. She did it entirely off her own bat. And the only influence, I think, that the family had on her being a writer was that as a child she got the idea that writing was what you did. You know, father wrote for a living. That seemed a natural thing to do. And she started writing novels and has never looked back. How she does it, I don't know. She's a barrister, retired, but she has 4 children between the ages of 7 and 13. And where Dickens she gets the time from, I just don't know.
Well, let's see if you can aim for a little detachment here, George. Is she any good?
Yeah. Yes, she's good. Well, I am not the easiest reader in the world. There are very few modern authors that I'll read. Ed McBain. And oddly enough, I don't know why, C.P. Snow, although he's been dead a while now, but he's post-war, you know. And I read and enjoyed his novels and sometimes go back to them. Yes, she's good. Oh, she's good and getting better. She's, I mean, for a woman writer, she's rather caustic and funny. And I mustn't go on but I think she's hell of a good, actually. But possibly I'm prejudiced, I don't know.
No, I tried to get you to be as detached as
Well, I'm
possible.
trying to be as
Professional,
detached as
professional.
possible, and I can only say this. She sent us a manuscript that she'd done, I think it was about her second or third book, and I was in Edinburgh, God knows what I was doing, some signing session or something like that, and Edinburgh Literary Festival, that was it. And I had the manuscript in my hotel room, and I found myself hurrying back to get on with it.
Mm.
And if that happens, you've got a winner, you know.
Right.
And she has done very well.
But the others didn't.
No, well, Simon has always been a lawyer. He went into law and was a solicitor, usually in criminal cases, and then he was made a sheriff, a judge. And he is a sheriff in Dumbarton at the moment, and no, he hasn't shown any inclination. Although both he and his brother write well, but they don't. They're too busy, and if you're a sheriff, I don't think you've much spare time. You do an awful lot of writing, but it's writing judgments. Nick, on the other hand, I always have great difficulty in describing what Nicky does for a living. He used to be in the theatre. In fact, the first job he got, he likes to say he was supporting Stanley Baxter in Panto. In fact, that meant he was holding the trap door through which Baxter either appeared or disappeared. But after that, he worked in London on shows, Starlight Express and Guys and Dolls and various things, and was what was called a master carpenter. And then he went into, well, he's now working on his own, and what he does is sort of arrange events and shows and exhibitions. The big dinosaur exhibition at the Natural History Museum, Nicky put the dinosaurs in, you know, that sort of thing. And he's working now on the Football Museum at Preston and some huge thing at Birmingham and various other things.
Perhaps they should have put him in the Millennium Dome.
He was.
Was he?
Yep. He was. He takes no responsibility for the contents. That had nothing to do with him. What he had to do was, for two of the zones, he had to organize the people who were working in the two zones. I forget what were one of the play zone was one. I forget which the other one was. But he had nothing to do with the contents, but he had a lot to do with the people putting the contents in place. I mean, that really is his job, setting things up. So that was the Millennium Dome. As far as
do you get to see much of your family? Do they come to you, or do you have to?
No, they come to us. They come to us in the summer, and we recover by about Christmas. You know, because
and of course they're Manx, are they? They're all Manx.
They're all
Manx.
they're all residents. If you know,
I mean Manx born.
No.
Oh no.
No, they're all two of them English born, Caro and Si, and one Glasgow born, Nicky. But Caro is one of the few people I know who actually has a document saying you are an Isle of Man citizen, you know.
Yeah.
And I forget how that arose. Something to do with working for Kelly Luft and going across and coming back and that sort of thing. But no, we see them in the summer, and the grandchildren who love the island. Mind you, if you live in London, it's easy to see why. You know. And I mean, we have a cottage up on Clayhead, and they invade that. And they spend all the time at the beaches and on the trains and so on. And I think it's great.
This is author the late George Macdonald Fraser in conversation with Terry Cringle. For those unfamiliar with the dastardly Harry Flashman, here he is, inadvertently and quivering with fear, leading the Light Brigade into the Valley of Death when his horse bolts.
And then was seen with what nobility the gallant Flashman rode, ahead even of his valiant chief, his eye flashing terribly as he hurtled sabre in hand against the foe. We can guess the fierce spirit that burned in that manly breast.
It was nothing to the fierce wind that burned in my manly bowels, but that's the blasted newspapers for you.
More now from Flashman author George Macdonald Fraser in conversation with Terry Cringle.
Now, I suppose you and I have a little bit in common in the sense that we're both newspapermen.
Mm-hmm.
We're a couple of old hacks. And like old hacks everywhere, I suppose, these days we go around muttering to ourselves and thinking these young people, these young men and women can't write. They don't know how to spell. They need a spell check all the time. They don't know where the apostrophe should go.
That is very true.
The
grammar is pathetic.
And the grammar is rotten, and they will use crutch words and expressions which are rather nasty and unoriginal and copied from other people.
That's right.
Are we being too superior here?
No.
Or was it better in our
Yes,
day?
it was, considerably. And I know why. I mean, I don't know where you started. I started in a little weekly. And there was an old chief sub-editor who was an enthusiast for Hardy and Walter Scott. Now, I don't know how many chief sub-editors now have that kind of... I mean, he was totally self-educated. There was a breed of newspapermen, old newspapermen when I started, who were like that. And by gum, they were good.
The men I seem to remember were always well read. They'd read a great deal. And I think probably like you, I was brought up to read a great deal. I mean, a comic in the old days was The Wizard.
Exactly.
Which was no pictures, mostly text.
Yeah. And they were well written. Oddly enough, I was over in Dundee a couple of years ago, and I wanted to have a look at The Wizard, and they trotted out the files for me, and by gum, those stories were good. They were beautifully written.
Yeah.
And as you say, they weren't
plotting
comic
as well.
strips.
Tremendous plotting.
Oh, they were good. I don't know who wrote for the Wizard, the Hotspur, the Rover, and so on, but they knew their stuff, and I rather think some of them were quite well-known names.
Yes, disguised.
Okay.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh no, I mean, you would. I don't know whether it's to do with the decline in education, because whatever they say about pass rates and so on, I have noticed that there is now a generation of people who don't know I from me, who from whom. That's a beauty.
Yeah.
May from might, and so on. Indeed, but what would you when one of the great broadsheet newspapers doesn't know the difference between procrastinate and prevaricate? Then I think we've got trouble. You know.
Right, well, now that we're on to the business of writing, let's talk about the books. Now, I've got to say at this stage, and George knows it, that he is perhaps my greatest literary hero, with the possible exception of the late Patrick Campbell.
Oh, that was a great man.
Now, yes.
I never met him, but I knew his brother well, Michael. Patrick was terrific.
But he wasn't just a humorist, he was a superb writer of the English language.
He was.
And I've read and reread him to this day. I've got all his books. His use of language is so economical.
Yes.
And he could paint a picture in a few words.
I first came across him in Lilliput.
Yes.
No. No, he was good.
Anyway, your books. Now, I bought the very first Flashman, called Flashman, when it came out in 1969. and it cost 25 shillings, 25 bob, if people
Did
understand how. Yes, I was just looking at it before I came up, and it is a first edition, and I'm hanging on to it. They do say that modern first editions of modern novels do gain in value. That's not why
they're quite pricey now, I happen to know, particularly in America.
Well, I've got a first edition. I've got all your books first edition, and I actually got another one and gave it to my son. So my son reads Flashman now, I'm glad to say.
Good.
And I've got to tell you that if I ever become famous and I get onto Desert Island Discs and they ask me which is the book I'm going to take apart from the works of Shakespeare and the Bible, I'm going to say Flashman.
Well,
now,
thank you.
it seems such a simple idea. You found this startling, amazing, forceful literary creation who was suddenly just cut off in his prime. He was found, as you know, pissy drunk was the expression.
Right.
Yeah. And then he disappeared from view, and you brought him back to life as Flashman, the poltroon, the cad, the womanizer, still keeping, you know, what he was. It seems to be such a simple idea. So how did it come about? Was it all of a sudden a flash of light? Or
I don't know. I mean, I think I first read Tom Brown's School Days as a boy, and I thought then that's the best character in the book, the most interesting. Okay, a complete rotter, but nevertheless a very interesting character. And when he goes out, I don't know, the book becomes very flat. It becomes a sort of moral tract, which I suppose is what Hughes meant it to be. I have an idea that he found Flashman was beginning to take over and decided to get rid of him.
And the bad boys, of course, are always well, not always, but generally the most interesting characters in fiction.
Yes.
They attract the most attention, and then
And I certainly wondered, I don't know when, I began to wonder whether it was as a child or later on, what happened to him. Well, obviously he would go into the army, and obviously he would go to the bad. And it's clear from Tom Brown's School Days when he was expelled from rugby, right at the beginning of Queen Victoria's reign. So there is the whole of the Victorian era in front of him, and the first big campaign was the first Afghan war.
Yeah.
So stick him into that, you know.
And you had the whole of the 19th century to have a go at.
Exactly.
A huge playground.
That's right.
And you've still not milked it
Oh,
dry.
I'm not anything like finished with it, you know. The people keep going on at me, particularly from the United States, about when is he going to be in the American Civil War? To which I can only reply, when I feel like it.
Yes, indeed.
They,
Now, did you sell it straight away? Did you send it to Herbert Jenkins, and Herbert Jenkins says, "Great, wonderful, magnificent. Here's £1,000 or whatever it is."
It's I tried it. Various publishers rejected it. It was rejected by about half a dozen in Britain and the same number in the United States. Nobody wanted it. For 2 years, one famous literary agent, who shall be nameless, refused even to touch it. And I don't know why, actually.
I was going to say, did anybody ever say why? I mean, all novels are read, and
The Americans didn't like the name. But that meant it didn't mean anything to them, you know. Not that it means a great deal to anyone who hasn't read Tom Brown's School Days in this country, but no, there was no particular explanation given, but I think I know why it happened. It's an unusual book. Whatever its merits, it isn't normal. It isn't in the ordinary run. So it can't be classified by a publisher's reader. He can't say, yes, this is like Ian Fleming or so-and-so, and I can predict roughly how it will do. He can look at he looks at Flashman and he just doesn't know. It may come off well, it may fall flat in its face. I think that's the explanation. And a perfectly normal and reasonable one, because God help us, I was a features editor for a long time. I had no idea what people would like. And I think it's Noel Coward says, you must just write whatever you want yourself, and if the public happen to like it, you're in. If they don't, you've had it. And so it for 2 years, it bounced from one publisher to another. And eventually, I remembered the name of I had tried to write fiction a few years earlier, and it hadn't succeeded, but an agent who had tried very hard was John Farquharson. And I thought, should we? No, give it up. Kathy said, no, go on. It's going to get published sooner or later. And so I sent it to John Farquharson and was lucky to get the greatest literary agent in the world, as he is generally acknowledged to be. His name was George Greenfield. Alas, he died about a year ago. And George persevered with it, sent it to half a dozen different firms, all of whom rejected it. And finally, Herbert Jenkins, who were a rather crazy little firm, they published P.G. Wodehouse, and that was about that lot. And they lived in a curious little backwater in Clement's Inn with a lift that you had to pull a rope in order to get up and down, and there were these very genteel, nice little men popping in and out, and there seemed to be they were rather like pixies, but they liked it.
Two wordsmiths in conversation, both sadly no longer with us. Terry Cringle, talking with George Macdonald Fraser. Both loved language, and it showed. Terry asked him about Harry Flashman, the bully from Tom Brown's school days, who I mentioned in the opening. George took him and his adventures all over the world, rubbing shoulders with real historic characters. But Terry asked, is there possibly another such person from a well-known work who's just waiting to have his or her later years explored?
One thing, and I can't say that it was an inspiration or anything like that, but I remember there was a television series which I never actually saw, but just heard about, and it was based on a book by either R.F. Delderfield or E.M. Delafield. I don't know one from t'other, I'm afraid, called The Adventures of Ben Gunn. And someone had lifted Ben Gunn from Treasure Island, and what happened to him, you know. And they made a TV series out of it, I believe. Again, I didn't see it, but I remember thinking, that's a good idea. And, since then, someone's written The Fortunes of Falstaff. And someone's written a sequel to Gone with the Wind. That kind of thing.
Yes, that's a sequel, though, isn't it?
It is. But I'm trying to... I don't know of any sort of supporting player who has sort of finished early or been killed off by his author. No,
well, believe
I can't
me,
think of one.
I've been looking for one, George. Believe me. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, in a sense, Stoppard did something like this with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Yes, yeah.
You know.
But even so, that was a one-off.
But that was a one-off. I don't know. Let me think of a character.
If you think of one, tell me before I
will.
Go. Now, there have been 11 Flashmans, the latest one, Flashman and the Tiger, now out in paperback. Now, this time you went in for 3 separate stories, 3 segments, instead of one continuous story. Was there any reason for that? Or were you doing a bit of tidying up here?
I was doing a bit of tidying up.
With, from Sandalwana and, the Zulu War.
That's right, I was. What happened was that 25 years ago, an old buddy of mine, we'd been sub-editors together in Glasgow, Alistair Burnett, and he became editor of The Economist and The Express before he went to television and became one of their star news people. And when he was editor of the Express, he said to me, "Can you do me a Flashman short story, and we'll run it as a serial for a week?" So I did Flashman at Isandlwana.
Yes.
And how he fled, and the sequel to it. And that was, about 10 to 15,000 words. Well, ever since, I've said to myself, right, I'm going to write a novel that is a good deal shorter than the average, and I'll be able to include that as well. And every damn time I started in, and lo and behold, I found myself writing a full-length novel. So it never got into hardcovers until I consciously said, right, there was a time Kathy and I went on holiday to Bad Ischl in Austria, and I remember there was a salt mine,
Yes.
and a nice hunting lodge where the Emperor Franz Joseph used to stay. And I thought, I'll get something out of that, but it won't be full length.
Now, normally you take Flashman, you pick a period or a war or a section of 19th century history, you slip him into it, and then at the end you slip him out of it, and it's all against a background of historical fact.
Yeah.
The attack on the Emperor Franz Joseph, the attempt on his life, that didn't happen, did it?
No, that was fiction.
This is wholly fiction.
But all the background about his hunting lodge and how he used to go there and his character and his relations with the Empress and so on, that's all true. And that's all. And I mean, I started it off with Flashman travelling on the Orient Express on this maiden voyage, so to speak, because I'd been on the Orient Express and I thought this is too good and too romantic a train to neglect. And it all coincided with a holiday that Franz Joseph had at Bad Ischl, and that was within a few days of the Orient Express's first journey, and that was it. I thought what could have happened, and just dreamed up this assassination plot. I mean, God knows there had been enough attempts to assassinate European royalty at that time, and a couple on Franz Joseph himself.
Flashman, you still haven't milked his period, his lifetime.
Oh no, there's a lot to go at still.
So you're going to carry on.
Touch wood, I hope so.
You're virtually being bullied into it, because all your readers, just as soon as one Flashman comes out, if they get the chance to get hold of you, they're going to say, well, when's the next one and what is it going to be about?
And I mean, I get
They'd put you on a life support machine and make you keep writing.
More or less. And I get lots of tactful letters saying, you are not getting any younger.
Yes.
And a lot of them, well, not a lot of them, but some of them, obviously, they know what they want him to do and where they want him to go, which is just a damn nuisance as far as I'm concerned. Because, I mean, I know what I want to do with him. And the Americans particularly, you see, the trouble is, oh God, I've offended one or two of them, because they think that the American Civil War was the most important event of the last century. Now, to them it was.
Yes.
And one chap wrote to me, I remember, and said, this is going to be the highlight of his career. And I'm afraid I was silly and tactless. I wrote back and said, look, as far as Flashman's concerned, the Civil War in America is a foreign sideshow. It doesn't compare with the mutiny, the Crimea, and so on.
And especially as he has all the arrogance of the Englishman of the 19th century.
Exactly.
Anybody who reads the dust covers of your books will see that all sorts of great writers have said wonderful things about you. Dennis Wheatley, Auberon Waugh, P.G. Wodehouse, Kingsley Amis. Is that flattering to be...
Yes. I mean, to have Wodehouse...
Yes, I remember his remark, this Watcher of the Skies and the New Planet stuff.
That's
right.
right.
I thought that was a marvellous quote.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a lovely quote.
And of course, historical accuracy has been such a factor in the books. I mean, they literally you teach history.
Well, I want to get the history.
I've learned
right.
more history than I ever learned at school.
That's what Teddy Wogan said.
Yeah.
That he didn't know any history until he started reading the books. You go to a period, and there is your plot in a way for you. You know.
Yes.
If he's going into the first Afghan war, the first Afghan war took a certain course, and all you have to do is weave him into it. And
but you also have to read the books.
oh yes, you
have to read the history.
Oh gosh, yes, and that's half the fun.
Is it?
Oh yeah.
I believe you do it in Ireland.
And I used to. I used to go to Dublin because they're very relaxed and casual at both the National Library and Trinity, and they just used to let me in and let me go wild. I mean, most libraries you go to, you have to check things in and out. You know, they were very good. But since then, I've discovered the London Library, and the London Library is the greatest library in the world, as far as I'm concerned, because it's huge. I mean, I should think after the British Library must be the biggest in Britain, and certainly the biggest private one. And they will let you, if you are a country member, as I am here, you can have 14 books at a time sent to you. Now, I've got the catalogue.
They would send them to the island?
Yeah. Oh, they do. And this is the beauty of it. I mean, I've got the catalogue.
Well, perhaps they do it for you, but they might not do it for everybody.
Yes, they will.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Franz Joseph, for example, and look him up in the catalogue, see what was written about him in the last century, and pound to a penny they'll have it. And there we are.
Now, the footnotes,
Yeah.
that's where all the facts have to be,
That's
and
right.
they have to be right. Now, you
Yeah.
have been caught out, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I've made mistakes. I mean, I had the Duke of Wellington, the Duchess of Wellington alive several years after she died. That, incidentally, was the fault of the Times newspaper of 1840 something or other. They had a misleading piece, and that caught me out. But no one has ever noticed it.
No.
Except me. And I got a letter from the Foreign Office rebuking me for having a British ambassador in Washington in the 1840s. We didn't have an ambassador, we had a resident minister.
Right.
So, I mean, the beauty of that kind of thing is that I can always write back and say Flashman is just an ignorant old man. No one has ever written to me about it, and I have confessed it publicly. In one book, he's been chased through the snows of Russia in a sledge
Yes.
by wolves.
Yeah.
And he says, looking at the wolves, that he's never been able to look an Alsatian in the face since. Now, until he died in 1915, and alas, at that time, the Alsatian was known as the German Shepherd, and didn't start getting called the Alsatian until 1960.
Perhaps dog lovers don't like your books, George.
So,
Well, speaking of the Times, it said, there's another again, this is from your dust jackets, Mr. Fraser's effrontery, like Flashman's, is eventually irresistible. Now, you do perpetrate some outrageous things. For instance, in one book, you try to persuade us that Flashman encountered Abraham Lincoln,
that's right.
and Flashman gave to Lincoln his most famous quote,
Yeah.
"You can't fool all the people
That's
all
right.
of the time." Now, that was outrageous,
That's
George.
bloody cheek. Yes, I agree. It's in the same book, and I suppose it was terribly cheeky. I used in Uncle Tom's Cabin. Eliza escapes from the slave catchers, or Simon Ridley or someone, leaping from ice floe to ice floe. and getting to the other side. And she had with her child a fine boy called Harry. I hadn't and that never occurred to me. But anyway, I thought, God, that's a good way to escape from slave catchers. And so I got Flashman doing that with an escaped slave. And I was suggesting that Louisa M. Alcott, not Louisa M. Alcott, Harriet Beecher Stowe, got the idea from Flashman's escapade, because she didn't write her book until a couple of years later.
Before we leave Flashman, George, he is a womanizer, and you write a lot about his sexual encounters. Mm-hmm. Now, you're not an explicit writer of sex, and yet you say enough for any percipient reader to be able to know exactly what was afoot. And there's no doubt about it, he was a pretty exotic sexual performer.
Mind you, it's very tame stuff nowadays.
Well, yes.
And I wouldn't have got away with it 20 years earlier. It's one of those, the way fashion changes, you couldn't have used those. I couldn't have used that kind of description in 1949.
No.
1969, okay.
Yeah.
At 1999, 2000,
anything goes.
It's practically prim.
Yeah. Now, all writers write from experience.
Mm-hmm.
Now then, George.
No, I do not. I've been asked, how much is Flashman like you? And the answer is not at all. But
yes, I have read
he
that.
Very often thinks the way I think.
Yeah.
Yes, and a lot of his views are the same as mine.
Hmm.
But there we really part company.
Hmm. Well, one of the things I wanted to talk about is your attitude to modern life. But quickly, run through some of the books. Mr. American, which I liked. You brought back The Hole in the Wall, Gallant Butch and Sundance, and you brought old General Flashman into that.
Yeah,
then you seem to like pirates. You wrote The Pirates.
If I have a favourite book, that if all my books had to be destroyed except one, I would like it to be The Pirates.
Is that true? Yeah.
Because it's crackers.
It's
absolutely crazy.
And yet you managed to sustain the joke right to the end.
Well, that was a deliberate attempt. The odd thing about it is, I read many years ago, and I still have them in the house and look at them from time to time, nonsense novels by Stephen Leacock.
Leacock, yes.
Who is my hero. I don't know anyone as funny as he is in such a short space. Mm. He was a genius in that way. Spike Milligan was a Leacock fan. But anyway.
Yes, the nonsense novels were well named.
Nonsense novels. One of them was called Soaked in Seaweed or Upset in the Ocean. Mm. And it's about a chap on a ship, and it's madness, it's just crazy. And I was a fine young fellow, bronzed by the sun and the moon, with copper-coloured spots from the effect of the stars. Leacock was far out. Mm. And when the ship sets sail, he notes that the sailors are nailing up the masts and pouring hot tar down the companionway. Yes. It's just nuts. And I thought, I wonder if that kind of thing could be sustained over a full-length novel. And
you did it.
That was The Pirates. Mm.
And the movie didn't work.
I didn't care for it. Well, the BBC adapted it, and I didn't care for the adaptation.
Right.
It has gone since. I can't understand German, so I don't know. But it's been done as a musical in Germany.
Really?
And it's done as a radio serial in South Africa. But I'd love to be able to understand the German music.
Now, you're obviously, it's obviously you're a film buff, the Hollywood history of the world,
yeah,
where you put forward and set out to prove that the old adage that Hollywood makes a movie, it grabs a piece of history, especially non-American history, and makes a nonsense of it. And
well, in some cases,
yeah, it did. Yes.
yeah.
I mean, in Errol Flynn, The Charge of the Light Brigade. you
Oh,
know.
that was, and yet the odd thing about that is that while that was utter nonsense, as far as the Charge of the Light Brigade was
Yes.
concerned, it incorporated
The
at one
episode.
point a thing from the Indian Mutiny which was spot on,
Yeah.
and I've always maintained, and one of the things I maintain in the book is that Hollywood gets an awful lot of history right.
Right. Yeah.
They, as well as being an awful hash of it. I'm afraid that isn't true much longer. I mean, I saw Braveheart, and really that's an insult.
So I believe.
Oh,
I haven't seen
mean,
it.
it's pathetic. And I believe the same thing has happened. They've made a film called The Patriot, which is about some evil person who never existed in the American War of Independence, a British officer who herds people into churches and burns them alive, this kind of tripe, you know.
Yeah.
Why, I don't know.
It just seems to be aiming for audience.
I suppose so, yeah. I suppose so.
Now I come to perhaps, one of my favourite books, and perhaps the most favourite one of all outside your Flashman's, and that was The Candlemas Road.
Oh, some weirdo.
Well, I don't know. I was the voice of that little Portuguese cleric, Luis Guevara. He comes across so clearly. How did you manage to get inside him and his mind and his language? And
It's his language. I mean, they okay. It's mock Elizabethan, you know. I don't know why I decided to write it. I'd tried it as a play. This is the ironic thing about that. I'd written it as a play, and it wasn't much good as a play. So I thought I'll try it as a book. And it was a very short book.
yes,
Written in Elizabethan style in the first person, and about an incident on the border in Elizabeth's time, and that was all. And it was later dramatised by the people, or I dramatised it for the BBC, and it was a successful play. Which is what it had started off as, so to speak.
Archie Noble, and I thought was a splendid.
Archie Noble, the Reaver, yes.
Yes.
He's there were so many like him. There's two magnificent volumes, the Calendar of Border Papers, and they are wonderful reading. I mean, they are the records, wardens' letters, eyewitness accounts, etc., of what was happening on the borders in the days of the Reavers. And you get the language there, you get the history there, you get the characters there.
Well, you've written your own definitive book about the Border Reavers, so somebody may be consulting you one day.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's,
Now, we are running out of time a bit, so I'm going to leapfrog Black Ajax for all that. I loved all that, the Regency talk, and I loved that expression. Where it comes from, I don't know. It was in your glossary. Ballamrankum, a dance by naked
yes.
prostitutes.
That's right.
Wonderful.
The expression I liked particularly, because it sounds so modern American, to be sick, flash the hash.
Flash the hash, yes.
You know. But there again, an awful lot of
American slang, which we think is American slang,
are
is in fact British English.
that have gone out in this country.
Yeah. Now I'm going to bring you now, quartered safe out here. John Keegan called it perhaps one of the greatest memoirs of modern warfare. You fought as a rifleman just at the end of the war in Burma with the Border Regiment.
That's right.
It is, quartered safe out here is a quotation from Kipling.
That's right.
How there was obviously a little some element of invention there. They weren't all real characters. They were
yes, they are.
But
every one of them. No, they're. I have amalgamated characters elsewhere. There were one or two in whom I incorporated more than one person. Yes.
Yes, that's what I meant.
That's right. Oh, actually, what really it amounts to is that there was a man whom I have drawn accurately, or as accurate as I can, and I have attributed something that happened to someone else to him. Yeah.
Right. Now, just briefly then, that episode with the Piat. Just explain to the audience what a Piat is. Probably people won't know.
Projector infantry anti-tank. It's a plumber's nightmare. It's
I know the weapon you mean. I wouldn't have gone near one.
and it fires a bomb, which they say knocks out a tank, and I believe it does. And I was instructed to use one against a boat, and it worked very well. No one believes that characters like the man I introduced in that episode, Captain Grief.
Yes.
Nobody believes that they existed, and they did. The woods were full of them. Mad as hatters.
Mad as hatters, yes.
And talking mad.
How did you remember the way he spoke?
Easy.
After all those years?
Once heard, never forgotten, you know. He always addressed me as What's It. Never by my name. And, I remember him saying, "Tell me, What's It, are you a Lurkin-Firkin or a Peeping Gremlin?" And I said, I don't know, sir. And he said, "Well, you'll have to find out by tomorrow, you know." And later, at the end of my acquaintance with him, he said, "I realise you're not a Lurkin-Firkin or a Peeping Gremlin. You're an evil weevil, written all over you." You know, he was, as I say, it's an affected craziness, and I don't know why they. I think it probably that these people like that, they seem to work on some high octane spirit, and I think they found it necessary because he was a very desperate character, leading a small force against the Japanese, and I think he probably found it helpful to be crazy and to treat everything as crazy. I suppose the arch example is Wingate.
Yes.
Who, according to all I have been told, used to go about with an alarm clock on his finger, telling people it's later than you think, scrubbed himself with a toothbrush, and was an authority on Donald Duck. You know, they and by all accounts was fairly crackers.
The late George Macdonald Fraser, Manx resident, talking with Terry Cringle.